Uh, Glad to be here on this beautiful Iowa spring day. Iowa has two seasons, autumn and lousy. I feel as though I won a contest and the first prize was frostbite. But I'm willing to go through this madness if you are willing to go through this madness. I think I'm going to have a male midlife crisis. I think I'm going through one, as a matter of fact. Not right this minute. You don't have to move back. I'm not Anita Bryant, after all. But I read about them the other day, and actually they seemed like fun. As I understand it, you get to quit your job, ride around on a motorcycle, and chase pretty girls, which is more excitement than I'm having lately, to tell you the truth. I'm about the right age, 43. I'm about the right station in life. I've achieved most of the things I set out to do. I got my own column, wrote a book, covered the girls' basketball tournament twice. I mean, what else is there, really? And yet it's all meaningless somehow. I have an urge to break out in new directions, to live. Last time I felt that way was when I entered college a long, long time ago. And I suffered what I now think of as my pre-life crisis. And I grew up in a rather sheltered atmosphere in a Polish neighborhood on the near west side of Detroit. They didn't have midlife crises there in those days. They didn't have midlives, to tell you the truth. People worked until they got too old to work, and they never asked what it all meant. You didn't come home from work and say, "Gee, Cecilia, shoveling coal at the blast furnace has ceased being a challenge to me. I think I'll quit my job and become a bum so I can find the real me." It simply never happened. Our social life in those days was far more innocent. If you liked a girl, you took her bowling. If she liked you, she let you win. And that's all she'd let you do. From that environment, I went to the University of Michigan, where I discovered the joys of smoking, drinking, and women who did not bowl. I didn't like smoking. Of course, all there was to smoke was tobacco. Still, I figured 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. When people ask me what I majored in college, I tell them English. But really, I majored in drinking and not bowling. Thus, while my social life improved at the University of Michigan dramatically, my college transcript went to hell. I got terrible grades. I didn't show up for class. I didn't do the assignments, largely because I didn't know what the assignments were, not having shown up for class. One year, I remember I took a French course. I registered for it, went the first week, never went back again. So at the end of the semester, I went to my instructor, and I said, you know, you're probably wondering why I didn't come to class this semester. And he says, yes, I was afraid you might have met with foul play, as a matter of fact. Well, I begged for mercy. I gave him a big sob story and asked him for a second chance. And he was a nice man. In fact, he was visibly moved by my demonstration. The tears, I think, got to him. And he said he would allow me to take the final on a pass-fail basis. In other words, if I passed the final, he'd give me a C, and if I didn't, he'd give me an E. And those were my choices, and I thought that was generous. So I stayed up all night, studying for the exam. And I fell asleep over my books and slept through the exam. That is a true anecdote, and not uncharacteristic of my early college career. The first 5 or 6 years, I know what you're wondering. You're wondering, why did they keep that clown in school all that time? Oh, there were simpler times, for one thing, but also, I managed to discover the conditional transitional program. See, I started college as an engineer, and I was a terrible engineer. That was even before my pre-life crisis. I went to class in engineering school and was a lousy student. I could never figure out basic engineering concepts, like why the inches on the slide rule weren't all the same length. I remember one semester my life kind of turned around because I took engineering English. They called it that to separate it from English that people spoke, you know. So English for engineers. And I studied for my finals that year almost exclusively by reading a series of short comic novels by Max Schulman. This inspired me on my final exam in engineering English to write it in the form of a short comic novel by Max Schulman. And it just flipped the instructor out. It was the first time anyone had ever been funny on purpose in his class, and he gave me an A, which flipped me out because it was the first A I'd ever gotten in engineering school. So I decided that I would transfer to lit school, become an English major, and be an all-A student running funny comic novels like Max Schulman, except that my grades were so bad, the lit school wouldn't accept me, so they put me on this conditional transitional program. This will be absolutely understandable to everybody in administration and to no one else. They kept my records in engineering school. They allowed me to take all my courses in lit school. Well, when I transferred, I discovered even then writing like Max Schulman wasn't the key to all courses. So while I did better, I did not do well. I still got D's and E's along with a C or a B or whatever. The thing was, engine school didn't want to kick me out because I was flunking lit school courses. And lit school couldn't kick me out because my records were in the engineering department. So I set an intercollegiate record for consecutive semesters on the conditional transitional program until I finally flunked out of school. They took the cowardly way out. They waited until I contracted a case of mononucleosis. I was in the hospital 15 days with mononucleosis. I was written up in a medical journal. The doctor said I had succumbed to the pressures of not bowling. While I was in the hospital, they kicked me out of school, and I was too weak to talk myself back in, which was the beginning of the end of my pre-life crisis. I had to go to work, and there's nothing harder on a pre-life crisis than a job. I got the best job my 4 years of college had fitted me for, stock boy at the SS Kresge headquarters in Detroit. That set me to thinking. The manager liked my work. He said I was the best stock boy with 4 years of college they'd ever had. After I got my strength back, I took a better job. I became a chip man in a ball bearing factory. It's kind of a janitor with a wheelbarrow instead of a broom. I used to collect metal shavings and out of a oil bath and put them in a centrifuge and make a giant Brillo pad out of them and throw them away and pour the oil back in the machines. I did that all night. I worked from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. And that's what ended my pre-life crisis for me. It suddenly occurred to me that I could go on doing this for the rest of my life unless I got out and hustled. So I got out and hustled. I talked my way back into school, and with new resolve, attended class, did assignments, got good grades. I got married. I went to graduate school. I had kids. That's middle class. I'd left my pre-life crisis behind me, along with all thoughts of ever having a good time again. Fitting in with that, I came to Des Moines. In a short time, I was committing daily journalism and being a model of rectitude in industry, until lately. I've got 2 kids of college age, and they're having their own pre-life crises. I told my daughter that watching her grow up is like seeing my life pass before my eyes. Somehow I enjoyed it more the first time. She recently went to Argentina for a few months, visited some friends of ours. She called and said, "Oh, Dad, you wouldn't believe the pace here is so much nicer than the pace in the United States." I said, "How do you know? You haven't tried the pace in the United States yet." My wife is afraid that I'll do something foolish like run out and buy a Buick or something like that. And I may. You know, the midlife crisis is beginning to achieve the status of a universal experience in our society, and I think it's important that we understand it. The American system feeds on dissatisfaction. As soon as we realize goals that we set for ourselves, we are expected to set new, higher goals. If, God forbid, we should act contented, all our friends accuse us of stagnation. Eventually, of course, we set goals that are beyond our reach. We make ourselves miserable by trying for them. And that's what we call success. And it's no wonder people are having midlife crises. I'm not sure that the same phenomenon that we're talking about isn't taking place on a national political level. And you read complaints about Jimmy Carter being a boring president. He's going to be a one-term president, the press says. You know, he's been in office, when he was office 6 months, he says he's going to be a one-term president. Well, I'm no great defender of Jimmy Carter, but I don't see what's wrong with the president being dull. When you talk about an exciting president, talk about Lyndon Johnson. There was an exciting president. He had wars, riots, tear gas. I mean, it was a thrill a minute, believe me. Well, and Nixon, you know, there's nothing dull about him. His administration read like a crime novel. You could say Ford was a dull president, but I think there's an important distinction to be made between being dull and being a dullard. Personally, I still think the presidency was vacant while Ford held it. Carter's intelligently dull. I mean, nothing much happens, but he makes the right sounds for the most part. You know, and if he were a great president, you'd never find out, well, with Congress the way it is. I mean, Congress, you know, I know a lot of congressmen, and surprisingly enough, most of them are dedicated, intelligent people. Somehow Congress manages to be less than the sum of its parts. When you look, say 4 or 5 years ago, if you looked at the people who were most powerful in Congress, you would pick people like Carl Albert, and, Otto Passman, Wayne Hayes, Wilbur Mills, Charles Diggs. Not one of those guys doesn't have dirt on his suit now, and they're fighting to stay out of jail, some of them. Those are the chosen leaders of Congress. And yet the discontent seems to focus on the presidency. People keep looking at Carter and saying, is this all there is? Well, maybe, but you know, we're not in a war. We don't have a depression. Actually, if those things were going on during the Nixon or Johnson administrations, we'd have thought that was terrific. Nothing terrible is happening, but we're still dissatisfied. It's this kind of vague dissatisfaction of the midlife crisis, and we're looking for the equivalent that people in their midlife crises look for. One notices a movement toward Jerry Brown, the Kawasaki of American politics. Terrific trail bike, but I'm not sure he's going to make a good president. And I am sure that that's not a good trend. The fact that Jerry Brown would undeniably be much more interesting than Carter is not really relevant to his comparative fitness for office. If I were to criticize Carter, it would not be for his dullness, but for his sanctimoniousness. I will never lie to you. I will never mislead you, he says. Oh, come on, Jimmy. A politician is a politician. He will say what he has to say to be elected. He will do what he has to do to be reelected. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. And it's okay for politicians to be a little human. Carter should have said, I will never lie to you, but sometimes I will mislead you, so watch it. Just as Nixon should have said, I am not a crook, very often. You can live with candor, you know? There is, I think, at this point, an almost bottomless cynicism toward the words of presidents. I think in our society, as I remember it, it began with Dwight Eisenhower, who was one of the great dull presidents, by the way. He had a talent for dullness. He took office and people immediately became bored with the Korean War. He was a grandfather figure. And I remember it was about this time of year, he announced that we were immersed in what became known as a U-2 incident. There was a high weather reconnaissance plane stationed in Turkey, and it had wandered over the Russian border. The pilot had become stoned on oxygen or something. And they shot him down, the dirty red commies, they shot him down. Which was just what we'd always been taught to believe that the dirty red commies would do, you know. And we were all upset. And then Khrushchev had a little press conference saying, well, actually we shot the guy down 1,500 miles inside the borders of Russia. And that's a hell of a trip no matter what you're stoned on. He was a spy. They had him alive. He was talking. Well, that was a shock to know that the president had lied to us. Presidents had always lied to us, of course, but we hadn't realized it in quite that way. Then, after that, later that year, there were the great debates between Nixon and Kennedy. And of course, everybody that I knew was for Nixon. In fact, I was 24 years old before I ever met anyone who was for Nixon. But everybody I knew was for Kennedy. And they were happy with him. And in the debates, we thought he killed Kennedy, and he came down hard on the missile gap, which was a Republican's fault. And he also complained about the fact that Cuba was 90 miles off the coast of Florida and promised to do something about that. And after the election, amazing thing happened. You never heard about the missile gap again. Not after he took office, I'm talking about the day after the election. He didn't even have to take office. That ended the missile gap. Never heard another word about it. And Cuba remained 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So I figured, well, yeah, he was kind of blowing smoke in my ear. I didn't regret my vote. Under the circumstances, I would have voted for a Cocker Spaniel. In fact, I have, as a matter of fact, when Nixon has run against him. Then you had the whole Johnson era, where we got lied to about the war. Johnson saying, you know, I'm not gonna let American boys do Asian boys fighting for them. Goldwater was the guy who wanted to honor commitments. You know, we thought he was crazy. He said, I remember one incident in particular during that campaign. It was a long time ago. I guess it was 1964. At one point, Goldwater said that we should go into Southeast Asia and defoliate the jungle. And that was such a foreign concept to all of us. We laughed. We said, oh my God, that Barry Goldwater, he's a caution. He wants to defoliate the jungle. And Johnson became president, and there went the jungle. And then, of course, Nixon, you know, the truth teller. You know, many people argue that Nixon didn't do anything that any other president didn't do, and that's true in a sense. He is, however, the first president to take the sins of his predecessors and treat it like a Chinese menu. 2 from column A, 3 from column B. I remember the most fantastic part of the whole Nixon administration, which to me is just a mother lode of fantasy, were the tapes. I remember when Butterfield first announced that there was a tape recorder going all the time there in the Oval Room. I figured, what? Big deal. You know, the guy's there. He knows the tape machine is going. No one else does. He's not going to say anything to incriminate himself. It would be like, you know, catching Alan Funt on candid camera. And then the tapes came out, and there was Alan Funt talking to a parking meter. Well, this unrelieved assault on credibility of the president is not helped, I think, by fatuous statements like, I will never lie to you. You know, the great trick in life, particularly in a democracy, is to remain cynical about one's chosen leaders. Cynical not because they're bad men, but because they're mortal men who sometimes fall victim to the delusion that they're gods. Yet one must not let this cynicism paralyze one's will. All need not be hopeless. It is merely difficult. I mean, a nation of our size and complexity cannot be well governed by a people who try to discover a knight on a white horse every 4 years while they play with their snowmobiles. You can't turn over the governing of a nation or a city to people whom you elect with scant attention. It takes constant, unremitting pressure after the election to make a politician do what he should. It's hard, dirty, time-consuming work, and it's the only way to have decent government. In fact, if you gave me the choice between having a paragon as an elected official or a low, mediocre guy, but to have the paragon ignored by the electorate and have the mediocre guy have a good deal of citizen participation, I would not hesitate to take the mediocre person. Now, this country's midlife crisis can only be solved, as all midlife crises ultimately are solved, not by buying the motorcycle. You have to give yourself a boot and a tail, stop feeling sorry for yourself, and do meaningful work. I close by offering 2 thoughts, which between them embody all I know about life. The first is a quotation from a poet, Delmore Schwartz, who once said, "Even paranoids have enemies." And the second is by one of my favorite political philosophers and one of the great satirists of all time, Peter Finley Dunne. Finley Peter done. It's one of those who has, in his persona of Mr. Dooley, said, "Trust everybody, but cut the cards." Thank you very much.